Okay, now is the time for the affirmative conclusion. Mr. Albrecht, you have 10 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
All right. Today's debate was clear on a number of issues. In today's debate, we saw that Turretinfan was interested in me trying to find a church father that explicitly taught papal infallibility in the first, second, and so on centuries. As we've seen from the fathers already, no fathers specifically mentioned papal infallibility in the early church. And that is not damaging to this case at all. Because they did, as we saw in Cyprian, speak that no error could come from the seed of Peter. In order to find a father that specifically taught papal infallibility, we'd have to have them outline the teaching as Vatican I put it forth, in explicit terms. And I dare say that there isn't even a single early father that put forth the teaching of the Trinity in explicit terms in every single facet of that historical truth. So I believe it to be a straw argument. I also never said that the continuity of the church proved papal infallibility, nor did I say the keys related to doctrine. I want to be clear that I said that the papacy, the office, must continue because the church continues. Matthew 28 is not a proof of papal infallibility, but rather for the perpetuity of the office. This is a reason that the Sedevacantists are wrong in claiming that the office does not need, in fact, to ever or eventually be filled once a pope has vacated it. Because as Acts 1 shows us, the office must be filled, not just by any other individual that can be picked, but that particular office must be filled. That is why the office of the papacy must be perpetual. Ignatius never mentions the name of the Bishop of Rome. Well, Ignatius doesn't mention a lot of things. This doesn't mean that he did not believe in the office of the papacy. Again, this is an argument from silence. Cyprian did resist the Pope. It doesn't mean that he didn't believe in the office of the papacy, as we've already seen. I think Turretinfan is also a little confused on Augustine. He said that causa finita est is a gloss. It is not a gloss. Turretinfan is thinking of Roma locuta finita est, I believe, not causa finita est. I believe he's thinking of the famous terminology that Carl Keating used and a couple of other individuals. And I indeed am not referencing that. I'm referencing something completely different. This is not a gloss from Augustine. But again, I agree. I agree with the work found within Porter's study that Matthew 16:19 should be rendered, literally, whatever you might bind on earth is going to be bound in heaven, or is expected to be in a state of boundness in heaven. And whatever you might loose upon the earth is expected to be in a state of lucidness in heaven. In Porter's masterful compilation of the study of the Greek phrasing of this passage, he's clear that Christ tells us whatever is bound on earth then is in a state of boundness in heaven. Whatever Peter binds or looses, I agree with Porter that heaven ratifying earth's decision is clearly established. It is clearly established. Whatever Peter binds on earth, it will be in a state of boundness in heaven. The same goes for the loosing. And again, as I pointed out, it might stun somebody. It might make somebody think that is outrageous to say that God would grant an individual authority over human destiny. As Porter says, and even make God responsive to human decision making. Sounds nuts, doesn't it? But it's a historical truth evinced in the text of Scripture. Matthew 16:19 tells us that on whatever you bind, Peter, and whatever you loose is going to be bound and loosed in heaven. Turretinfan is right. God does not need papal infallibility for the church to be true or to be around. There could be a spattering remnant with only 2 or 3 people alive at the end of times, the time when the world comes to an end. It is logical that the office of the papacy would not be essential at the end of times when the world ends. That is logical. The papacy is essential for all times under normal circumstances, though. But again, Matthew 16:19 is clear. It is the killer verse for papal infallibility. Greek scholars see it. The fathers saw it. And even Turretinfan had to admit it. He admitted that this verse was referring to Peter. Whatever Peter binds in the future perfect tense of istai didemenon is shall having been bound, and estile illuminon shall having been loosed. This gives us the clear image that heaven is confirming whatever Peter binds or looses. The Greek formulation shows us that heaven receives the binding and loosing from earth. But from who? From Peter. How much clearer can we be here? Even Turretinfan admitted, heaven cannot ratify a lie. Therefore, whatever Peter binds or looses must be infallible. You can disagree whether they're successors if you want. I wish we would have had time to get into that more. Of course, it's a whole other debate. We didn't have the time. But no matter which way you cut it, this verse shows us that Peter is infallible. Whatever he binds and whatever he looses, it is as simple as that. Does John 21 and Luke and the passage in Luke show us papal infallibility in explicit terms? No, I never argued that. But it supplements the truth of Matthew 16. It supplements the fact that Peter is the head shepherd and that he is to strengthen the brethren. It is no wonder that Paul visited Peter to obtain information from him. Why not James? Why not any of the other apostles? Turretinfan thinks I'm missing the point of lexicons. I know exactly what lexicons are and what they do. And you know what? I think Turretinfan has a perfect point. Some people that cannot read biblical Greek think that using a lexicon is the end-all of their point. Turretinfan is right. We must understand the word in its context. And it is important seeing how the surrounding literature and even patristic sources used this word. John Chrysostom wasn't reading modern Greek as it's read today. He wasn't dealing with the MGP. John Chrysostom knew the biblical Greek perfectly. And indeed, it isn't only every single lexicon and dictionary that interprets this word historici as visiting to obtain information from. It's also G.D. Kilpatrick, who studied the Latin, the Coptic, and the Syriac versions, and he sees the same thing here. Even the great Father Chrysostom saw the difference in the Greek word heiden and historici used here. And he himself noticed that it carried weight with it. You're right, Turretinfan. Right next to the Greek word historici, we have another Greek word used. It is there for a reason, to show us the difference in Paul's visitation to Peter. It carried weight with it. Chrysostom saw the difference there. Liddell and Scott didn't just gloss over this word either. They wrote a whole article on it. And they concluded, in what is considered the best study on this term, that it meant to get information from Cephas. He was seeking to learn and to be taught from the Pope. It couldn't be clearer. So we hinge upon Matthew 16:19. Let's read it one more time before we end the debate. Let's read what a Greek scholar, how he placed it as. And I'm not going to read into it. I'm going to read it plain and simple. Whatever you might bind upon the earth is expected to be in a state of boundness in heaven. And whatever you might loose upon the earth is expected to be in a state of lucidness in heaven. That's in reference to Peter. Now, what church, what faith is a faith that believes this verse at face value? Which church believes that whatever Peter binds on earth is going to be bound in heaven? What church believes that whatever he looses on earth is going to be loosed in heaven? I think we know the answer to that. And Turretinfan is right. Porter is not a Catholic. A number of things he says go against the Catholic faith. And I specifically dealt with his dealing with this passage. Hopefully Porter will, this work, and included in Porter's work at least, hopefully Protestants will see this truth. And hopefully their views in the papacy will continue to evolve and they'll eventually reach the level that Christ wanted us to be at. And I pray to God that one day this historical truth is believed by all the faithful. And I want to thank Turretinfan for being a great debating opponent, and I want to thank Matt for being a fantastic moderator. And hopefully we can do more debates in the future, and that concludes my closing statement. God bless.
And that ends the debate. Thank you, Mr. Albrecht and Turretinfan, for participating.